have very casual conversation in English,
こうしたフォーマルレクチャーするだけの英語力ありません。
but fortunately, it's not good enough for
And,
doing a formal lecture.
And
on a
yo no
scale like
comprende el español también. ごめんなさい。スペイン語もあまりよくわかりません。
Oh, sorry, I can't really speak Spanish all that well either.
で、私たちはね、人類の歴史を紐解くと、いつの時代でも
Back in human history,
戦い合い、殺し合い、
there's
奪い
always
合っ
been
てきました。
fights, deaths, taking possessions from one another throughout human history.
で今でも大きい国、強い国
And
が
we can see that these powerful nations,
自分の国の利益を
even as we
追
see
求するあまり、小さい
that
弱
they're
い
in
国を犯
pursuit of their
しておりま
profit,
す。はい、
they're threatening smaller, less powerful nations.
でまたその一方、今
On the other hand,
新型コロナウイルス COVID-19 は
we see
た
the
くさん
threat
の
of
人々の命
COVID-19.
を奪っております。
This pandemic has affected so many people's lives. Many have died as a result.
こんな時であればこそ、社
And
会の
because
平和と
of the situation that we're facing,
人々の幸せをみんなで心を合わせ
it
て
is
作り
even
上
more
げていこ
important
うと。
for us to come together to really
うん、
build the happiness
そ
that
うい
we
う
all seek.
この試みはグローバルサミットは本当に素晴らしいと思います。
So for that purpose, I really have a deep respect for this global summit.
私は、大義を始めてから70年になりますが、
It's been 70 years since I began
体で何か求めようとすると、
my adventure. So when I try to do something with
すぐにスポ
my
ーツの
body,
世界選手権とかオリンピックがあります。
we immediately think about these world championships, the Olympics.
しかしそれはもう10代から30代ぐらいまでの若者たちがメ
These
ダ
are
ルを
really for people in their teens, maybe up to their 30s, fighting for the medals
メダルや記録を競いますが、
or going for breaking the
命は
records.
70年、80年、
But
90
when
年
you look at the lifespan of an individual, it can easily go up to 70 or even longer.
それを思うと年を取り、
So
命
considering
が
that,
終わるまで私たちが現役として一生学び続けられる
we want to be able to keep learning until the very last day of
ボディトレーニ
that
ング
would
があっていい
span
ではないか
decades.
と思います。
So that is why that spiritual and bodily wellness is very important to us.
それで私は柔道、空手、合気
I
な
have
どを
done
経て、
judo, karate, and
そのだか
aikido,
ら道というものに根ざしてそれを求め
striving to find the
道を
Tao.
求め続ける大義を作ろうと決
And
心
that
し
is
た。
what I decided to do.
で、道とは日本語では無限の真理のことです。それを求めて
Tao is ultimately the truth.
これを求めて体を使っていくことでもあり、
And in pursuit of that truth, you use your body.
またその勉強方法でもあります。
So what I've tried to devise is a way to find that.
で、我々のこの大きな銀河宇宙系には約
In our great
1500
cosmos,
億という銀河があると言われております。
there are galaxies
で、そし
over
て
150 billion.
その一つである我々の銀河にはまた2000
And
億
in
の
our
星があると
galaxy,
言われています。
that's just one of them, have 200 billion
その大宇宙の生命エネルギーはそれらを作り、その中の一つである地球におびただしい
and
命
that
を
is all this vast
作って
universe
きました。
has been providing us
でその
with
生命エネルギ
great
ーの
amounts
こ
of
とを
energy, this life energy.
昔の人は
People
神とか
used to call these great energies as kami
空とか
or
無とか
deities.
ソフィアとか
Sophia,
ハギオンプネウマとか
Agion,
神の霊
Pudeoma.
とか
There are these great
宇宙神などと呼んできましたが、
concepts that people have been trying to figure out in human history. And we have been devoting prayers to these
私はそれを
energies,
本当に体で感じ、それとともに生きること
feeling
がで
these energies with our body and live with that.
道というものを確立したかったのです。
That is the Tao that I wanted to establish.
で、そして私はそのためにた
And
く
in
さん
order
優
to
し
do
い
that,
大義を作り上げました。
I have created various levels of
There's-
principles.
そこではもうより早く、より高く、より強くあるための筋肉作りは一切なくて、
There's no quick muscle building hints or any life hacks such as that.
心を無にして、こ
You
の
have
力
to be
みですね、力みを
You have to
捨
be
て
still.
たり
Your spirit must be still
相手と溶け合い、自然と溶
and
け合っていくこ
meld,
とを目的として
fuse
おります。
with those around you with the nature.
で、それを勉強していくとき、私たち
When
の
I was
体は
studying this, and when any of
お
us
互いに
are
響
studying
き合い
this,
ながら
it
変
means
化
that
し、
we're resonating
成長
with
し、
one
発
another.
展していきます。
We grow with one another.
で、そのためにはまずその道を
In
歩も
order
う
to
と
do that, you
決心することが大
first
事です。
have to make the decision to go down that path,
一番目ですね。で、
which is
心
number
を
one,
無にして夢
pushing or
中にな
resolve.
り、本当に体を柔らかくして集中しきる必要があります。
You have to be in the most
で、3
flexible
番目、
state.
はい、3番目にそれをすると、
And
やが
number
て
three, when you do
相
that,
手が、対象がその姿を消していくという状況
then
があります。
you start to identify that your object starts to dissolve into nothingness.
それは
The
楽器を
object
使ってて、
disappears.
ミュージシャンが
The
楽器を
example is
忘れる。
musician playing a
そして
musical
自分を
instrument.
忘れるのと同じです。
You're no longer looking really at your instrument.
で、
You
さらに
know
進むと、自
what you're
分自
doing,
身の意
what
識
you
も
can
消え
do.
ていきます。
And then your
で、そしてついには
consciousness
一
disappears.
切は無である。
Ultimately,
全
you
身に
arrive at a stage where
感じ取れ
all
る。
is nothing.
禅でいう無の境地です。
This is the mu, the state of mu as being taught in
で、
the
そ
Zen
れで
sect
終
of
わりではあり
Buddhism.
ません。さらに進む
This
と、
does, and it doesn't even end
一切
there.
を忘
There's
れ、
further. You
ただ大いな
all
る
is
自然
gone,
の流れのままに
and
いける
you're
ようになります。
simply wafting in this greatness of nature.
ここまでは禅の方で確立されておりました。800
Up
年
to
も前か
here,
ら確立され
this
ておりました。
has already been established in the teachings of Zen
でも
as early
私
as
はまだま
800
だ
years
先があ
ago.
ることを
But I
認識し
believe
ました。
that there's more
で、さら
beyond
に
that
そこを
point.
過ぎると、
So after you pass that point,
私たちの魂の無限の宇宙空間を感じるようになります。
we begin to feel the unlimited nature of the space around our spirit.
しかしそれは無限の空間でありながら、無限の
It's an
精神空間であり
unlimited,
ながら、
vast space with no
成長
limit.
しようと思うと、
However, if you want to grow,
バリアが出てきます。境界が出てきます。
you realize there's a barrier.
ちょうど走り高跳びや棒高跳びで棒を越えるようなものですね。
Think about those track events where you have to overcome various obstacles.
で、そこを通り越すと、ま
So
た無
once
限
you
の
overcome them,
精
then
神空間が
in
開かれ
front
ま
of
す。
you, there's this limitless spiritual sphere,
で、そ
space.
のレベルも卒業すると、
And once you go beyond that level even,
もはや前後左右上下、もう周りすべてが真っ白い。
all around you, everything,
霧の中にいるように見えてきます。
it looks like you're surrounded
うん
in fog.
で、そしてそこをさらに進み、さらに
And you
成長
keep
していくと、
going, you keep growing.
わ
Then
私たちはもうただ一人ここに立ってると。
you arrive at
で、すなわち
the
今、
dokusan state, meaning
私たち
you're
は今生き
alone
てここにい
on
る
it.
というだけが最も
I'm
大切
alive.
なものだという、
This is where I
こ
am.
う
That
認
is
識
ultimately
で
the
きるように
most
なります。
important
はい
concept. And you come to realize that.
で、道はここで完結すると思います。これ以上
I
はもう、
believe
あとは
that is the end
神の国
of
に入っ
Tao.
ていくしかないで
Once
す
you。go beyond
はい
that, you have to become some sort of divine being.
それで大宇宙の真理を求める体の道ということで、
So this is the Tao of the body
で
in seek of the ultimate truth.
はいで天神大道という名前をつけました。
That is why I named this Tenshin Taido,
ど
or
うぞ
the
皆
way
さ
of the
ん
universal
覚え
truth.
てください。
I would like you to please
天神大
remember
道
this.
は、はい、ビーフステーキ、トマトソース、ユナイテッド・ステー
Tenshin
ツ、
Taido
ジョン・レノンと同じ長さですから大丈夫で
is the
す。
same length as beefsteak, tomato sauce, John Lennon, United States. So it should be pretty easy for you to remember this.
天神大道です。
It is
そういう
Tenshin Taido.
で私はこれをみんなで本当にこれからですね、世界中の人
What I
が
wanted to
すでに
do
やってる人
is
も
to
多い
share
です
this
が、
concept with
みん
people
なで
around the world. There are
や
many
っ
already
ていき
practicing
たいと
this.
思います。で、これはお互いに新しい幸せ
This
な
is about
幸せな社会を作り、
happiness, a
それを
society in which we can all live in happiness.
自然と共に生き、また
We coexist with
美
nature
しい文化として次
to
の
build a
子供たち
beautiful
の
culture
時代に
and to
残してい
pass
く
this
と思
on,
っております。
pass this on to the next following generations.
そういうことでですね、今日この天神大道を 取り上げてくださったことに心から感謝します。
So that is why I'm truly thankful that you are allowing me to talk about Tenshin Taido today.
で、私はこのグローバルサミットは、
In this
みんな
global
参加する
summit
みんなの意識のレベルに応じて、これが広がると思います。
is probably going to develop as we see what level of people are gathered
ま
here.
た、一人一人の心のつながりがです
Also,
ね、
it's about
そのつな
the
がりの強
connection
さ
that
に
each and everyone
応じ
makes
て
with one another.
世界
And
に
depending
広
on
まり、
how strong
高
that
まっていくと
is,
思います。
it will keep spreading to the rest of the world.
で、強力にこれから世界に働いていくようになります。
And this is going to really be effective, affecting the world, impacting the world.
そういう意味で私は心から
So
この
that
グロ
is
ーバ
why
ルサミットの運動を応援するものであります。
that I would like to wholeheartedly support
Okay.
the
Thank you very
global
much.
summit.
Muchas gracias. 少し時間が余りましたが、
Thank you. I do have a minute or two left, but that is it.
青木先生、本当にありがとうございます。
Thank you.
それでは、thinking in Japanese and speaking in English doesn't work. And now to shine one of the brightest
ありがとうご
of
ざいました。
stage as we get into what will be one of the most dynamic conversations to kick off our grand adventure
それ
this
で
week.
は本日のイベントですけれども、
I think the translation is still coming through on the main voice here. Just
My apologies. One
No worries.
moment, please.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, I should be on the Japanese. Oh,
All right. Okay. Welcome to COVID webinars. Okay, and now to shine one of the brightest of lights on the stage as we get into what will be one of the most dynamic conversations to kick off, or one of our most dynamic explorations, excuse me, to kick off our grand adventures this week. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce to you Ms. Jackie Steele, who will be speaking on behalf of Domoto-san today. Dr. Jackie Steele is a trilingual political scientist and longtime Japan resident with expertise in diversity integration, women's empowerment, and inclusive decision-making. Mobilizing insights from philosophy, public policy, applied research, and practitioner experiences, Jackie is passionate about guiding stakeholders in the co-creation of vision, policies, and practices that place diversity and innovation at the core of business strategy and leadership culture. As a founder of Enjoy, she is networking over 100 thought leaders around the world who are sold on the idea that diversity and systemic equality are the key drivers of innovation and sustainable competitive edge. She is actively supporting corporations with technical expertise in law and policy to mainstream women's empowerment, LGBTQ inclusion, multicultural workplace solidarity, and intersectional diversity into the core DNA of corporate culture. Jackie serves as a governor of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Japan, is vice president at FEW Japan, and is an activator with CEO Canada. She is also a member of the collaborative hosted by Title Equality in Canada. Jackie celebrates diversity in life as in music and is an amateur taiko performing artist. Jackie, over to you. Jackie, I think you're on mute.
Nakazawa-san, thank you very much for the introduction. I really appreciate the honor to speak today with the Global Summit and to participate in this unique moment in history during a global pandemic when we are experiencing such change. And I think how the opening remarks by Rika Nakazawa were so profoundly on point. So today it is my great honor to mark and to honor and to introduce someone who I believe is one of the most formidable political leaders of our time. And I'm speaking, of course, of the Honorable Domoto Akiko Sensei. So as we troubleshoot some of the tech issues right now with the internet for her connection, I just wish to set the table about her contributions. Domoto Akiko Sensei is a political leader, former political leader, of Japan, but she is really someone who has worked tirelessly through 6 decades to advance gender equality in Japan, social justice, economic inclusion in Japan. And of course, she's worked on the international stage from everything from bringing the voices of women and gender and diversity into how we're thinking about biocultural diversity, but also how we're thinking about disaster risk governance. And what does it mean to build out collective resilience, and what a pivotal thinker to be so ahead of her time in her efforts throughout the last 60 years. Who would know that the implications of thinking about resilience at a collective worldwide scale in the way that she has done would be so timely for us to learn and start really listening, as Rika-san's opening remarks and appeal have invited us to stop and listen. So Akiko Nomoto Sensei is currently the president of the Japan Women's Network for Disaster Risk Reduction. She was a former member of the House of Councilors in Japan from 1989 to 2001. She also then went on to be governor, and so is a former governor of Chiba Prefecture, one of 3 women only who've been elected at the time. She was one of 3 women who had been elected governor, and she served from 2001 to 2009. But prior to her very esteemed political career, she in fact was a journalist, producer, director, and journalist with TBS, Tokyo Broadcasting System. And she put on the radar and acted as a third watch in some ways for democracy in Japan, again, bringing the voices of women. So she had won many awards for her documentary called The Baby Hotel, which I encourage all people to watch. And it really put the voices of working women in Japan, and particularly young mothers trying to make ends meet and working while trying to balance childcare without actual collective supports for that facet of our resilience for our childcare in Japan. She served as vice president and East Asia regional counselor for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. She served as president of Globe Japan, Globe International. She has won many esteemed awards, including for the 25 Women Leaders in Action in 1997 for UNEP. She's, of course, won the Prime Minister's Commendation for efforts towards the formation of a gender equal society in Japan. And she was recipient of the 2015 Fran Myers Award for Gender and Disasters. She still continues to serve as the National Committee for the UN 10 Years of Biodiversity with the Ministry of Environment in Japan, is the president of the Women in Health Network, and a board member still of the Biodiversity Network Japan. And of course, we are pleased to welcome her today to speak about, in some ways, what political leadership could be about in this time of difficulty, of collective thinking about risk governance. And so I will now take one moment to introduce and load the PowerPoint presentation for her presentation. So I am sorry to announce that it is apparently we're having still technical difficulties bringing Domoto Sensei online for the webinar. And I have been asked to proceed with putting on my political scientist hat as someone who has followed her work for the last 9 years on disaster risk resilience in particular. And so, albeit while we wait and hope that she will still be joining us and able to make the presentation, in the interest of proceeding, she has suggested that I continue to introduce some of her thoughts on biodiversity and what her prepared content for today to deliver and share with the world today. So, as we can see with her opening slide, I think social diversity and biodiversity serve really as these 2 pivotal concepts that have animated her work. And Domoto Sensei has been an advocate for some 6 decades. She recently celebrated her 88th birthday and really has been a champion also for gender equality in Japan throughout those 6 decades. And so she today has prepared a PowerPoint and a presentation for understanding and thinking about what are the different faces of democracy and what are the different roles in some ways that I think she has been able to play on the stage as a political leader in Japan, but also on the international and also Japanese national stage. So a little bit about her background, and Domoto Sensei in fact was born in California, but she did pursue her studies in Japan. And as a journalist, she's held a role, 5 roles, in some ways 5 roles for democracy. So as a journalist, advancing and being sort of the third watch and critique and pushing the government to hear the voices of women and social justice advocates, again, as a member of parliament, and then serving also at the international level for biodiversity and the conservation of nature. She has served also for the Women's Development and Education, Women's Development Environmental Organization, We Do, and again, then proceeded with her political career as governor, and then in her current role as a civil society leader. So as we think through these pivotal roles, these 5 roles about how do we as individuals show up, I guess, for democracy and for collective risk resilience building and fostering not only social justice, but also interspecies justice, and thinking about how we as a collective of the human family can really protect Mother Earth so that we can have sustainability. And I think this has been core to the kind of thought leadership that Domoto Sensei has championed. And we saw, of course, that she was observing at a very early time, not only in Japan, but also at the international level, that there was a dearth of women's voices, particularly, and of gender equal governance. And I think this has been central to her thinking. And while men have been allowed to have thought leadership on these stages within politics, within thought leadership, she was seeing these gaps and wondering how that affected our policy responses and our international law response on major UN conventions if we didn't have this diversity of women's voices and men's voices coming together in partnership. So a beautiful example, I think, of what gender equal partnership and the aspirations that she saw, and that she aimed to be the change to bring to the world stage, as well as to the Japanese stage. And so we have, of course, Domoto Sensei's efforts to bring gender forward as a cross-cutting issue that is in fact driving what our UN conventions, particularly for biological diversity and biodiversity, need to also think through. And so also bringing this voice and advocating for women's health and women's reproductive rights also at the UN Conference on Population and Development. As a governor then, when she left her role as a parliamentarian and decided to drive bottom-up democracy even further, and we had seen key law reforms adopted in Japan. For example, the Basic Law for Gender Equal Society was very much, she was a contributor to bringing in sort of legal parameters for the supporting civil society with the not-for-profit organization legal framework that was introduced in Japan, and bringing all of these pieces into the table. And we've seen then that as a governor, she sought to really then let that trickle down to the grassroots. And in Chiba Prefecture, she worked with civil society. She gave meaning to the not-for-profit law. She helped support and have roundtables and town halls with citizens in her own prefecture. And of course, as her role as a governor, she was pivotal in enacting the very first ever nationwide survey on the intersections of gender and disaster risk that was shared, and that we saw 1,746 municipalities, all municipalities across Japan, the local government being called to action to think about the intersections of how they do their planning on disaster risk and how they do their planning on gender equality. And are those parts of government in silos, or are they speaking to one another and thinking about collective resilience together? So as a governor, she really was pivotal. And then finally, in her most current role for the last 9 years, since the triple disaster of 2011, with the earthquake, the tsunami, and the devastation that then all entailed, as well then with the nuclear power plant challenges, Tomoto Sensei sprung to action, and she united women's organizations across the country into a coalition, and they advocated to the highest levels, using her ability as a political leader to be the change, to drive an open up voice for diverse women and diverse men and diverse families in the post-disaster context in Tohoku, to bring those realities to the attention of the national government and to inform the Reconstruction law framework to ensure that we had sort of greater gender equality built out on the Reconstruction Council, and that we really had this lens of bringing gender and diversity not only to the Japanese governmental response in the disaster post-disaster aftermath, but also over the last 9 years, working tirelessly with UNISDR and collaborators on the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and the new international framework that was adopted in Sendai in 2015. And so, you know, the Japan Women's Network for Disaster Risk sent a tremendous delegation to Sendai for that, and joined the women's group at the international level, the women's major group, to really bring voice to the UN Convention on Disaster Risk. And we see that this advocate, from being a third watch journalist and counterfact, you know, finding, and then hearing from women in the grassroots all the way in Tohoku post-disaster, and you see her delegation here at the bottom. They actually went on a fact-finding mission, you know, soon after the disaster. And this is a woman who was in her 70s at the time, who chose to make that decision. Such courage and political leadership, and then channeling that into the voice that gets heard at the UN level. So we see her here featured not only with the mayor of Sendai in the top right image, with the women's major group and different actors from WeDo who were also representing at that conference, and of course pivotal members of the Japan Women's Network, who were putting on a very key civil society forum. And you can see the publications that they even launched to document in both English and Japanese. So I encourage you to also consult that thought leadership that you can find, and learn more about how gender and disaster risk intersect. So Tomoto Sensei, for me, as someone who's followed her Japan Women's Network for 9 years as a political scientist and as a collaborator on gender and diversity for disaster risk and thinking about a new model, for me, Tomoto Sensei is one of the most quintessential examples of political leadership. It is someone who, she takes the courage of her convictions and she moves it forward, and she is an agent of change, even at, you know, as a young woman and as a journalist, as a parliamentarian, as a governor, and now as a leader of civil society. She is still tirelessly committed and bringing change. And I think about, you know, what do we often lack is this courage and conviction. In Japanese, we would maybe say yaruki, and that yaruki is so pivotal. And I guess that's why I love Ki. The character for Ki is spirit. And I put that here as a reminder, inspired by Tomoto Sensei, that we need to have the courage of our convictions, and we need to show up as citizens, as individuals, as a member of the family, the human family, and that we need to take care of Mother Earth. And I think Tomoto Sensei has been the embodiment of that, and continues to be that embodiment. And I'm sorry that she's not here to share those words with you in person. And I think that if we can take inspiration in her role modeling of how to be the change and how to be a catalyst during this pivotal time of a global pandemic, I think these are the words of political leadership we need to see around the world. And I think the personal is political, the political is personal, and that can begin from each one of us in our own hearts and in our own everyday actions in how we show up. So on that, I wish to conclude, and I will end the screen share.
Wonderful.
And hand back to Rika-san. Thank you, Rika.
Hey, Jackie, that was amazing. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to join us today, but you did an extraordinary job in representing her. So huge kudos and very well done. Bravo. All right, well, that is the conclusion of our opening sequence. Hopefully you're inspired, you're motivated, you're listening, you're thinking and getting ready to contribute in various ways and be part of the conversation online and offline. But what we're moving to next is a personal passion area for myself as well. At Board Seat Meet, what we're doing is we're driving gender and racial equity in the boardroom, because we believe that diversity is a fundamental tenet to high performance. But I think fundamentally, as the world gets ever smaller, in fact, testimony to what's happening with Corona is that a program like this can reach a much more diverse audience than had we had to stay in Japan and be in Japan. And also just with a lot of world events that are happening around us, I think that there's all kinds of tension in different parts of the world because of differences and because of the inability to tolerate diversity, even on the shores of the United States where I'm living right now. Of course, the unfortunate incident with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement has really shown a light on really paying attention to this matter of diversity because it's the right thing and it's also the smart thing. And ultimately, unless we embrace that, we're not going to be able to sustain as a human race. And so in some respects, you know, that this is the next section that we're moving to in the Leadership Forum here at the Global Summit is really apropos, because the conversation about diversity is what opens the aperture around creative thinking, around innovation, and all the different ways that you, Jackie, have been really applying your focus, your thought leadership, your actioning, bringing it all to life. So it's my pleasure to hand it over to you to now go into the next sequence around what we are calling the dawn of diversity. Hope you all enjoy. Have a great rest of your morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night, and I will see you all again very soon. Thank you. Over to you, Jackie.